The next is the critical path, and Elisa Chow will give us an update on that.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Chow. I'm a project manager for Reagan-Udall working on the Critical Path to TB Drug Regimens project. So just to provide a little context, Reagan-Udall is one of many partners working in the Critical Path to TB Drug Regimens project or initiative. So here, just to show you many of the diverse stakeholders involved in this project, ranging from leaders in global health, civil society organizations, nonprofit organizations, regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical companies, and other drug developers. So as you can see, there's a lot. I'm not going to go through them all. The general mission of CPTR is to basically speed the development of novel TB drug regimens. And to do this, we support advances in the regulatory science behind TB drug development, and also look at developing new tools and infrastructure to support TB drug development. So a little context, why TB? So background on why, in this country we might not think of TB offhand as being a major threat to global public health. But just providing a little statistics here from the WHO, estimates of about a third of the world's population is infected with TB, with 8.6 million people developing active disease annually and 1.3 million dying every year. So with acknowledging this threat, there's an urgent need for new medicines because the first-line treatments for treating TB are over 50 years old. While we've had some recent successes or developments, in December of 2012, bedaquiline was approved by the FDA, and then it was also approved in March of this year by the EMA, and also Dilamidid was approved just last month, April of this year, by the EMA. And also the second-line therapies that are used in treating resistant forms of the TB disease are very, first, costly, and also have many severe side effects. So in thinking about developing new treatments, we want to look to minimize the side effects to best help the patients. And so then, just the last bullet on the emerging problem of resistance. So the WHO estimates that 450,000 cases of resistant TB in 2012. So I think the statistics are this problem is leveling off, but this is still a very drastic need to address this issue and the need for novel regimens. So in thinking about TB drug development in general can be a very long, drawn-out process, ranging anywhere from 8 to 12 years. So we need regimens to treat TB, and the normal traditional way of developing regimens is to develop each drug individually throughout the development, and then before you can test them in combination with each other. So there's going to be a need to think a little bit outside the box for innovative ways to develop regimens. So one strategy shown here is thinking about how to develop drugs in combination instead of individually. So you're basically developing them together as a regimen, potentially shortening the time by 75%. Another novel challenge of TB is that the majority of the burden of TB is in low and middle income countries. So thinking through that, I mentioned the recent successes of approvals of bedaquiline and Dilamidid. These were approved in the US and or EMA, Europe. So we need a way, or facilitating access to these drugs in the countries where there's most need will require global collaboration. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this slide. Just wanted to throw it up to give you context for how CPTR is structured. So there's 4 main working areas, and Reagan-Udall, our work is primarily focused in the research resources group of the CPTR. And so the Research Resources Group mainly focuses on developing tools, resources, and infrastructure to support a novel regimen development. So this could include working towards harmonized global regulatory pathways, ensuring an ethical process in the research process, strategies to engage stakeholders throughout the research process, and also building expertise, regulatory science expertise, and capacity to support regimen development. So like I said, Reagan-Udall's work is focused in these areas of the Research Resources Group, focusing on global regulatory pathways, mainly looking at identifying regulatory challenges in TB clinical trials, and looking for ways to make these pathways more efficient. And then also our work, we do a lot of work in stakeholder and community engagement, finding out ways to increase the collaboration with key stakeholders throughout the research process. And also working on guidelines to incorporate participatory approaches into the research and clinical trial process. So I wanted to highlight some of the key achievement from the Regulatory Pathways Group. We hosted a session at the 2013 Regulatory CPTR workshop last year in October in DC. So we had representation from the FDA, the EMA, the Kenya Poisons Control Board, Brazil Health Authorities Agency, and the Thai FDA, as well as the WHO Pre-Qualifications Department. So we met in a small group, and our discussion mainly focused on discussing regulatory challenges for facilitating in review of TB drug dossiers, particularly in high-burden countries. And so a main theme that emerged from this is limited capacity, both in personnel and expertise. So that's why moving forward, one things we would like to look at is if we could develop any training or fellowship programs to increase this capacity. So future work for the global regulatory pathways end of things. One, we're looking at planning a workshop, hopefully later this year, to focus on recent progress in TB drug development, like I highlighted earlier on the bedaquiline and delamanid. Hopefully we will be able to kind of go through a case study of how these two drugs were approved, and particularly looking at any challenging issues that came up in the reviews for the regulators. And so the idea would be to invite regulators from the high burden countries to participate in this discussion so that eventually when they have the dossier come across their review desk, they'll be better prepared to review the drug. And then the last point I already mentioned, we're exploring opportunities to develop potential fellowships and regulatory capacity building. And then, so our second area of work in community, stakeholder and community engagement. So at last year's meeting, I shared the picture that I have here. We developed a resource document, I guess. It's called the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines for TB Drug Development, GPP-TB for short. So basically, this document serves as a framework for outlining ways to better engage patients and the communities in the trial or drug development process. So to build off that, we convened a workshop in October of last year held at the Union World Conference in Paris, called The Concepts, Value, and Practice of Community Engagement in TB Research. So this was a multi-stakeholder meeting. So we had representation from industry, from researchers, from clinical trial coordinators, community engagement coordinators, advocates, patients, so really diverse span. So moving forward, we're continuing to look at ways to increase participation in this discussion of how to increase community engagement and realize the importance of community engagement in clinical trials. Also, currently, we're collaborating with some other groups, including FHI 360, which received a grant to look at evaluation and implementation research of the GPP. So we're really excited to be working with them on this and look forward to their results. For future work, we're continuing to look at and develop tools and resources to support the GPP document. including webinars and trainings that will just help reinforce the principles outlined in the document. We were hoping to establish a community of practice, so a network which will help to connect all the people involved in community engagement in clinical trials. Because research is done across the world, and a lot of times the community engagement practitioners on these sites are very isolated and don't always have the support that they need on their individual sites. So our hope is by creating a community of practice, we'll be able to better support these individuals by connecting them, so they'll be able to share best practices, learnings, especially as a bonus to us, hopefully as they start to implement the GPP, share learnings from that, and then they can give us feedback on how to better tailor the guidelines to best revise them for their use. And the last point, again, I'll just repeat, we're continuing to work and explore collaborations to look at implementation research and evaluating the effect of community engagement and participatory approaches in research. And then I just invite you, if you would like to learn more, there's information on the Reagan-Udall website as well as the CPTR Initiatives website.
So I think this is a great project, of course, in terms of impact on global health. I'm just curious, you mentioned 2 drugs recently approved by FDA and EMA.
Yes.
Do you know what regions of the world were the clinical trials conducted that supported those drug approvals? Were those clinical trials done in the areas of high TB prevalence, or were they
Yes.
done in... Okay.
Yeah, so many were done throughout Sub-Saharan Africa region, South Africa, I believe some in Brazil, and I'm not sure. I believe there's also some in Asia as well.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously that's great, and
Yes.
the reason I was asking was because when I was curious as to whether some of the regulatory authorities in those regions of the world, would expect that trials would be conducted in the populations, and it sounds like they already are, because of course that's where the disease exists.
Any other questions?